Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage!
Guys, I'm back with part 2 of Terry Riley. I don't know if I mentioned actually in my first video that the 3 albums I talked about, this 1972 soundtrack to a French movie, and the Lifespan soundtrack, which was also a movie. I don't think it was French. It was definitely foreign. And the Persian Surgery Dervishes, a 2-album set of 2 live concert recordings. All 3 of those are totally Terry Riley solo stuff, all in the 70s actually. And Terry Riley's done a lot of composing on things that he didn't actually play on, simply composed. But I'm going to be jumping around, I guess a bit. I don't have you could do these things in order, but I don't really have it sorted in my mind that way, in order. I have a couple albums I'm going to show that I only have on vinyl, and because my turntable is all messed up and one of the channels cuts out frequently, I really don't use it much anymore. I really, one of my high priorities is to get a new turntable when I get working again. So I have a couple albums that are also solo albums I'm going to show. These 2, even though they're unrelated to each other, they're both from the 1980s. I'm sorry. One is a live concert from 1975, and the other one is a live concert from 1982, even though, oddly enough, the sound is really good on these. And I didn't remember until I looked at them that they were concert recordings. I thought both of these were studio recordings, but again, these are all Terry completely solo. The first one is called Songs for the 10 Voices of the Two Prophets. And this is an oddball album. There's actually 3 tracks on here, 22 minutes for one track, and the other 2 tracks are both 11 minutes long. This is Terry, and I didn't realize these were live, but it's Terry playing what was then new, 1982, the Prophet 5 synthesizers, which were new, which is kind of where the title comes from. It was a Prophet 5 synthesizer and 10 voices of the 2 prophets. So it's a nice little play on the technology there that he's using to make it. This is one of those, I wouldn't say records that divides fans, because there's from what I recall, I'm doing this simply by memory, a lot of singing on this. This one didn't get a whole lot of plays, as you can see. And I can tell the vinyl is still in absolutely perfect condition. The record jacket and everything. I haven't played this forever, and I'm even tempted now to pull it out and play it. Though I think I'm going to check. It's probably up on YouTube, and I probably wouldn't have to go clean off my turntable and listen to it with the one channel buzzing out every 2 seconds. But there's a lot of vocalizing on this, a lot of singing on this, which is not probably where your average Terry Riley fan really wants to hear him go so much. So I recall that one didn't get as many plays, though this one did. And this is I didn't realize this was a live concert disc. From what I remember, the sound is really good. This is a concert November 29, 1975, at a festival in Berlin. And this is more like the earlier Persian Surgery Dervishes album, with just Terry Riley using a modified Yamaha organ. And just playing it live with this kind of, it wasn't called a digital delay back then because it didn't exist, but that kind of delay that I talked about that he created. And here's an album, again, I got the glare issue here, called Descending Moonshine Dervishes. So it kind of calls attention to itself, back to the Persian Surgery Dervishes album, which was, again, a live solo, long improvisations, on keyboard. So this is another one of that same ilk. But I think, I recall this being one of the, ones that I would put on my to buy list. And oddly enough, these two albums, even though they're really unrelated, have been reissued on a CD package as a duo package. Two CDs, both albums packaged together. A little strange that they would throw these two together. I really want to get it, but I haven't, put out the money for it yet. But yeah, I really do want to pick up that that 2-disc set. So Descending Moonshine Dervishes, though, gets into an area that is a little bit different from the earlier albums I showed, and something that Riley did do quite a bit of from 1975 on. And I know I might be having some issues because I see this computer is like freezing and everything, so I don't know what's going to happen to the video here. So, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but I see my screen is freezing. I'm just going to keep going recording, and if it comes out messed up and defective, that's just the way it's going to be. So I was talking about, there's this thing called Just Intonation, which I mentioned in my first video, which is a completely different way, it's a completely different tuning system. So your ears are not going to be ready for it, even if you've listened to Asian music or music that uses different types of scales. This isn't like that. This is a completely different tuning system. So there's notes in between the notes, kind of, and things that sound like, they're flat or they're too sharp or something like that. So it's something that Terry did a whole lot of recordings on. Some of them on synthesizer, where the synthesizer was retuned to this new tuning system, and another one on piano. And it's hard to say which is more the successful conveyor of the music, because it both really requires maybe a bit of patience to get used to hearing this different tuning system and what sounds like it's flat at times, and really paying attention to it. And it's hard to say. This is one of the easier examples of listening to it from what I recall. The Descending Moonshine Dervishes. And he started doing this, from what I can see on these records, right around 1975. Like I said, I really do want to get this on CD. And he did another, really at the same time, grabbing my stack of CDs and things. I can't find my. I have some vinyl I know by him that I forgot to pull out, and I have this next album I'm about to show on vinyl, and I forgot to look for it. But Sri Camel, one of his rare instances of being on a major label. He initially started, INC was on a major label. Some of his early recordings in the late 60s, early 70s were on major labels. But most of the time, these are on European labels or small, very small labels, because obviously this is avant-garde music. It's not going to, sell a million, zillion copies. So I was a little surprised that even in the late 70s, CBS did sign Terry to record a few albums, and this Sri Camel is one of the few examples of Terry playing on a major label his Just Intonation music. And again, it's all Terry, just on synthesizer, retuned to this new tuning system. And this is pretty rare, though. It's the only studio recording of it that I'm aware of. Most of the recordings of this, him playing the keyboard, at least the synthesizer that was retuned, are actually live recordings. This one was done in the studio, and it's probably the reason why I would recommend this over the other various Just Intonation types of things that he's done. Is the sound's there, it's a little better, it's maybe a little bit clearer to understand, and obviously they've got the studio to get the sound quality up there. So even though this is essentially a live album, it was performed live in the studio, and I'm sorry, I didn't think. I know I have this on vinyl. So this is one of the better examples. This is from the late 70s, I want to say. I forgot to look this up. I think it was recorded in 79. I know it came out around 1980, I believe. This was also one of the early acquisitions, though. This is when I realized that if I was going to be into Terry Riley, I really had to pay attention, though, because it wasn't nearly as accessible as the albums that I showed in the first video. And all those albums are pretty much in standard tuning before Terry really started experimenting with this, alternate tuning system, the Just Intonation system. But this is the one, if you were going to pick one up, of him playing electric keyboard in a Just Intonation system, I would say this is the one to go for. Just because the sound quality is there, it's a little better, maybe a little bit easier to hear. Now, years later, in recent years, there's been a whole lot of releases of Terry's that are essentially, they're archive things. They're recordings that go back anywhere to the 60s, the 70s, etc. But they didn't really come out until the 2000s probably, or maybe the late 90s. And so, they're things that haven't been out there so much to hear prior, but are actually quite old. And this is one of them. And sticking in the Just Intonation thing, it's called Terry Riley, The Last Camel in Paris, which I'm guessing is referring to the fact that it's a live recording and the music is pretty much, I guess, the music that he was working on, the earlier Sri Camel album, kind of like a long concert version of the music that's on this. It's the same thing. It's solo Terry Riley, solo organ, with that delay thing going on, but with the Just Intonation system. And that's something that only came out 2008. So even though it's an older recording, and I don't have let me see, it was recorded in 1979, which was the time that he was working on the Sri Camel album in the studio. So it's essentially, I guess, him improvising and working out a lot of the Sri Camel material live in concert. And it was recorded by Radio France for a French cultural program in 1979. But the music did not come out until 2008. And again, being a live recording, the sound is very good on this one, I remember, but it's not quite the quality maybe of the studio recording, of the Sri Camel studio recording, and I think this is actually, I believe, a bit longer than the Sri Camel album, but again, it's kind of improvising, and listed here is the culmination of a decade of solo organ concerts. Oh no, I'm sorry, it came out in well, now on the front cover, though, it's saying that it's actually a live recording from 78, November 78, not 79. So, but it did come out in 2008. So it was actually something I guess it was him essentially working out the material that in 79 ended up on the studio recording Sri Camel. I don't know what that reference to 1979 concert was on the inside package, but on the cover here it says it's live 78. So, kind of like more of a jammy, him working it out live kind of version of the Sri Camel album. But I really, this is still my go-to album when I want to hear this kind of Just Intonation thing, which, like I said, does sound rather strange. Let me think. I'm trying, it's hard to keep these in some kind of order because the dates jump around quite a bit. There's one other album that Terry did in Just Intonation, except for this time he did it on piano. And it's quite interesting. It's a double record set. I remember buying this. This is from a record store purchase. in the late 80s, well, mid to late 80s. It's a double record set, one of the few double albums I've ever bought that doesn't have a gatefold. They just crammed the 2 discs inside the regular sleeve. And it's called The Harp of New Albion. Terry Riley, The Harp of New Albion. This is a bit later. And this, I want to say this is from the, I don't see a recording date on here. I want to say this is from, recorded January 3rd and 4th, 1986. So it's over a decade after the Sri Camel stuff, but Terry's still working in this just intonation system, but he brought it to a piano, so he had a very nice large, I don't know if it's a grand piano, tuned to this system. And like I said, it's weird because it's the only, one of the few 2 album sets that don't have a gatefold to it. And this was in the import, again, here's a record on Celestial Harmonies. It was released in America on Celestial Harmonies, which is a label out of Connecticut, but they stuck it in the import section of the record store that I bought it from. And they stuck it in the rock import section, and that's hardly fitting. I'm probably the only guy that would have ever seen it there. I don't know what I was doing in the rock import section. But at least that's what it says on the tag, on the label that's up on there. Though it looks like it came from an independent record store because it's got that kind of sticker on it that independent record stores used to put on there, and I don't see the name of the record store. So this is pretty intense stuff. This is about an hour and 50 minutes, hour and 55 minutes of just Terry playing piano in the just intonation system. Now the weird thing is there's some tracks on here that it sound different from this, and I almost want to say that there's a few of the tracks that actually almost sound like it's in standard tuning. The very first track, which was a 21.5-minute piece, is actually a really pretty piece. And when you listen to the other pieces, and all of a sudden the piano starts up, and it sounds incredibly like an out-of-tune piano, which it's not, it's more evident in certain pieces than in others. And I don't understand why, and it almost makes me want to say that there almost seems to be, like the first piece on here, which is a very pretty piece, for its whole duration, that almost sounds like it's in standard tuning. I don't know if that's the case, and I haven't reread the liner notes, but I'm pretty sure the whole thing is in just intonation, though I can't explain why some pieces sound, initially when you hear them, incredibly out of tune. But that's a just intonation system where every pitch is exactly the same distance as the previous pitch before it and the following pitch after it, instead of the way that the Western tuning system is, where there's big leaps in distance from one, and they're not even from one note to the next note. I really don't know any better way of talking about it. But as unusual as this sounds at first, if you're really into it, this is, again, it's almost 2 hours. But this is definitely on my to-buy list. I definitely put it on the list of, if you're going to get into just intonation, maybe it's a little bit easier to hear on piano than the synthesizer. I'm not sure. It's very different sounding on his synthesizer recordings. When I first heard it, it sounded like an out-of-tune piano. But when you really pay attention to it, it's weird because after a while, it's like your mind starts to adjust to it. After however long, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. Maybe not great for little bite-sized things of 5 and 10 minutes. It's a commitment, to really listen to. But I find it easy. For some reason, the first piece seems much more quote-unquote pretty and melodic, and it almost sounds like it's in standard notation, so it's a good way to start the album and get into it a little bit before you really start to hear the different tuning system. But this is one I was thrilled when it came out on CD, even though the vinyl sounds really good. And this is one of the things that I put on cassette very quickly. The vinyl sides, there's a couple sides that are over 30 minutes, so you're cramming a lot of stuff onto, a limited space. And, actually, yeah, all the vinyl sides, the shortest side is 21 and a half minutes, but there's two sides that are over 30 minutes. So when it came out on CD, I very quickly snapped it up. And I must have, on the same label, but it's one of those old-fashioned, remember when two CDs used to come in these thick, fat boxes? Now they would stick 4 CDs in the same amount of space. So, which goes to tell me how early into the CD era I bought it, because they haven't used these fat boxes, not for 2 CDs anyway, in many ages. And I just want to look in here. They did a good job on the CD issue. I was checking to see if maybe my receipt is in here, because I like to have the receipt. They did a decent job on the package. I imagine if you bought it now, it would be in the slim case. Not that it makes a difference. But they reproduced all of the liner notes that were in the 2LP set on the CD, and the CD, of course, to me sounds better. And I'm not worried about the wear on the vinyl and the fact that it's about 30 minutes aside. But this has to go in my recommended list. But you have to really pay attention, and maybe after, I don't know, that's the thing with how I hear things and how everybody else hears things. It's such an individual thing. Maybe there's some people that would hear that just intonation piano, and even after listening to it for a half hour, couldn't get the oddity of the pitch and the fact that it sounds like a piano that's out of tune out of their mind enough to let the music kind of roll over them. The music's fantastic, though. And that's one of the things that, of all the things he's done, that I have no trouble sitting there for the hour and 50 or hour and 55 minutes and listening to the whole thing. It's really like a trip, like a journey, like you're watching a movie almost. It's really excellent. He definitely conveyed what he wanted to convey, I think, successfully in that album. And a studio recording done in just a couple days. So about an hour and 55 minutes it looks like. Harp of New Albion. Love it, love it, love it. Great album of his. But one of those just intonation things. And at this rate, I'm not getting through very much of my collection, so it looks like I might have another 2 parts coming up here. I'm not sure, but I wanted to take the next step in showing my. Actually, I think I got all my vinyl out of the way except for the ones I couldn't find. So everything else I'm going to be sticking to CDs in the future. I only really bring the vinyl out because obviously on camera I think you see more detail because of the larger size. It shows it better. But I do prefer my stuff on CD. So I'm going to cut this off for now. Still, talking about all these albums are Terry completely solo. The next batch is going to be, I got a little bit more Terry solo, but not a whole lot. Terry writing for other people, ensembles recording his work, and maybe a couple things where he collaborates with other musicians. But I'll save that for next time. And so I hope everybody is getting some kind of value out of this. And if not, let me know and I won't continue on doing the rest. I will talk to you all soon. Take care.
Tune in next time for more Tales from the Garage.